Yosef spent 12 years in prison. Firstly, why was he in prison 10 years? And then he was kept there an additional 2 years. Well, it's explicit in the Chazal, in the Midrash, that when he interpreted the dreams of the wine steward and the baker, so the baker, the interpretation was that he was going to be hanged and birds will eat the flesh off his body. The wine steward, in 3 days, will be reinstated to be put back to his post as the wine steward. So Yosef, at that moment, felt that since the wine steward had an appreciation for what he had done for him, he interpreted the dream, he might as well, as we say, strike when the iron is hot. And he says, since I've done this for you, please remember me and mention me when you're going to be back in your position as minister of the, what referred to as the Chamberlain of the Cups. And the Torah tells us, Vayishkocheyu, that this wine steward, this minister, he forgot him, almost like intentionally. He wasn't concerned about Yosef's predicament, although he offered him this favor, this service, Vayishkocheyu. So Chazal tell us, because he said two words, remember me and mention me, for each word that he had requested, he spent another year in prison. Why? And Rashi cites Chazal. David Mel says, do not put your faith into the heathens. The Egyptians are heathens. Meaning there was never a consideration that the wine steward would even come to your assistance. He doesn't have a capacity to appreciate. So the Chazon Ish explains, we all know that there's a concept known as taking initiative. We have to take initiative, do our best, and Hashem continues. And we only make the move, and he brings about the result, if it's meant to be. So what's the claim against Yosef? So I'd mentioned, name it Chazon Ish. Initiative is only if it has a chance to succeed. But if it doesn't have a chance to succeed, and it's purely an act of desperation, that's considered being desperate. That's not called taking initiative. Yosef, when he had asked the wine steward to be appreciative for what he offered him, Yosef is in prison for 10 years, he's desperate. And he'll believe anything, so to say. And he believed that by offering this service, interpreting the dream of the wine steward, he would reciprocate, be appreciative for what he had done for him, but there wasn't a chance at all whatsoever. Therefore, the two words which he had requested, remember me and mention me, were an act of desperation because it was a lack of faith. Therefore, he spent 2 more years in prison. Now, why did he spend 10 years in prison? The initial 10 years. So we've mentioned this many times every year. The Gemara tells us in Sota that when the wife of his master had tried to seduce him, and the Midrash says she was a very beautiful woman, and she would change her clothing multiple times during the day to be attractive, and she continuously pestered him and tried to seduce him. And finally, on the day that it was their day of idol worship, it was their holiday, she remained in the home, and Yosef initially, according to one interpretation, had in mind he was going to actually commit adultery with her. But because he had seen the vision of his father, that stopped him in his tracks. But factually, he was overcome with desire for her, and when he was overcome for desire, he lost 10 droplets of semen. That's what happened. And the Gemara tells us for every droplet of semen he lost a son. Because we know that although Yosef was a son of Yaakov, and he was similar to his siblings, The children of the tribes are not tribes. Yosef's children are tribes. Ephraim and Manasseh are tribes. As Yaakov said, Ephraim and Manasseh, Kruvim, Shimon, Yali. Ephraim and Manasseh have the same status as Reuven and Shimon, although Reuven and Shimon are the children of Yaakov, and Ephraim and Manasseh are the children of Yosef. Yosef's dimension was his dimension of a patriarch. Therefore, his children assume the status of tribes. By losing those 10 droplets of semen, he was initially meant to have 12 sons. Each droplet which was lost, he lost a son, and therefore he only had 2 children rather than 12 children. Whether they would have been tribes or not, but there would have been another dimension regarding the Klal Yisrael. So for each droplet, he spent another year in prison. And for the 2 words which he added, remember me and mention me, in total, he spent 12 years in prison. What exactly is the Midah Keneged Midah? What is the measure for measure? So there's a morale, not regarding this particular point, but he presents a principle, a concept. Now, we speak about Golus, we speak about Shibud Mitzrayim, the bondage in Egypt. What is the concept of slavery? A slave. A slave is the chattel of the master. His actions are not his own, they're dictated by the master. Ultimately, even his thought process, due to his predicament, is controlled by the master. Because the master sets every moment of that slave's existence and provides the setting for that he functions. A slave is totally dominated. That's what a slave is. Total domination. We find, and we studied this in the Gurus Hashem, when Moshe Rabbeinu came as the Goel, as the Redeemer, and he performed the miracles, the Torah tells us, Vayamein ha'om, and the people believed. They believed. So the Medrash says, when they believed, when it says Vayamein ha'om, it says Miyad Poska Shiput. The bondage at that moment ceased. The Jews were no longer subject to the bondage in the physical sense. So Maral asks, why? Because they believed, is that a reason that the masters no longer could dictate the lives of the Jews? So Maral explains this as this. We find, what is the reality of physicality of existence? Everything in life, in existence, is cause and effect. Based on your environment, how you influenced, that's exactly how you're affected. So it's cause and effect. The concept of cause and effect is a physical concept. That's physicality. That's the physical world. You have something, it's at one stage, but due to the environment or other circumstances affect it to ultimately deteriorate, to no longer be. You have something fresh, you leave it, becomes less fresh, ultimately stale, ultimately totally disintegrates. That's cause and effect. We as human beings were affected beings. The norms of society, the values, the principles, the perceptions, whatever it may be, were affected. Idolatry, why the Jews became idolaters in Egypt? It was due to being the chattels and the subjects of the Egyptians. This is the idea. And the belief at that moment was the world was controlled by deities. That was the reality. To be able to believe in a monotheistic being despite the influences and the circumstances of slavery, of bondage, you're taking on a posture or profile, I'm an unaffected person. Despite what the beliefs of the world, whatever that may be, I'm not influenced. It's irrelevant. Assuming the posture of being unaffected, that's a spiritual posture. Once you become that spiritual person, you're no longer subject to the influences and the dictates of the master. Because slavery's control, influence, total influence. If they could believe despite everything, which was considered something very admirable for them and special, therefore the bondage stopped at that moment. Being uninfluenced, being unaffected, is a spiritual profile, characteristic. Klal Yisrael, we are the smallest nation in existence, handful of people relative to any other nation. The beliefs of the world, whether it's total paganism, whether it's the Trinity, whatever it is, the Jew doesn't believe this. And the Jew, in all circumstances, the Jew died not to be an idolater. They gave their lives. It's really almost like unheard of. Every other society, you assume the profile, the posture of whatever that society is. We find in Egypt, why did we merit redemption? 3 reasons. We did not change our language, our attire, and our names. We retained our identity. Usually, when a person becomes acculturated, he totally blends in with the society, and ultimately he assimilates and disappears. The Jewish people did not. So when it says Vayamin, they demonstrated they're not physical beings like other beings, therefore, Mi'at Posca Shibud. The bondage stopped immediately. That's the Maharal of Prague. We find that the Torah tells us about Moshe's physical condition before he passes away. Lo noslecho, lo koseino, that his vibrancy, physical vibrancy, was as if he was a young man. His eyesight was perfect. It gives us a whole physical update of Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, what's the Torah telling us? Tell us that he was the most humble person ever walked the face of the earth. That the Torah was given through him. He was the conduit for Torah. That we understand. But why is Torah giving us a physical update, evaluation of his condition before he passed away? And it says, Afilu bekever, that even in the grave, Moshe Rabbeinu had that vibrancy as if he was alive. Why? So the Maharal of Prague says, based on this principle, Moshe Rabbeinu was an unaffected person. Being unaffected, the whole aging process that he deteriorated had no relevance to him. That's exactly what the Torah is telling us. That's why the Torah is identifying his physicality. He has no relevance to physical existence in terms of the way he lived his life. Okay? Yosef himself was seduced by the wife of Potiphar. As I said, she seduced him, she threatened him, she intimidated him, and he evaded it continuously and stood up against her. Reached a point, he was overwhelmed. To what degree was he overwhelmed? Due to her approaches, 10 droplets of semen. So to what degree was he affected? 10. To the degree that you're affected, you're an affected being within the context of 10. That causes 10 years in prison. For every droplet he lost, he spent a year in prison. Now, after 10 years, he's reached a level of desperation. He has a new challenge. The Egyptian minister of the wine steward, he interprets his dreams. Now, what does he do? Does he maintain his rational understanding of reality, or does he succumb to desperation? He succumbed to desperation. His circumstance of being incarcerated caused him to become desperate. Because he became desperate, he did an act which was an act of futility, asking the wine steward. There wasn't a chance that he would even respond, and the Torah tells us, for those 2 words, then it says, Vayishkochehu, he intentionally forgot. There was never a consideration that he would ever have any reason to reciprocate and pay that debt of gratitude that Yosef had offered him. Therefore, that's the Midah Keneged Midah, that's the 10 and 2, and therefore he spent 12 years in prison for this reason. Now the Parsha Miketz begins, Vahi Miketz Shnusayim Yomim, and it was the end of 2 years exactly to the moment when Hashem punishes or rewards, it's exactly what you deserve. He deserved 2 additional years in prison. So what happens after 2 years are up? Vahi miketz shnasayim yomim. After 2 years are up, Paro begins dreaming. This is his opportunity to be released. He will no longer be a slave. Not only will he no longer be dominated and controlled as a prisoner, he becomes the viceroy of Egypt, and he dictates existence. Existence does not dictate his life any longer. From now going forward, till he dies, Yosef Mashbir. He is the sustainer of the world, and he prepares for the Golus because he dominates and dictates every aspect of Egyptian life on every level, as we'll discuss in a moment. And he provided the location to guarantee the survival of the Jewish people, that after 210 years, we should be in a position to be able to approach Sinai and become God's chosen people.